So are we live right now?
Okay, we are live now.
We still have a couple of minutes to go.
Where did the Zoom thing go? Yes. Okay, 2 more minutes and then we shall begin. Let me see how many participants are there. People have started joining.
So where's the dog? No.
Sorry.
The dog is still with us.
Okay, I'm also recording the whole discussion, so it will be on YouTube.
Oh, great.
Okay, so let's begin. Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for joining. I thank and I welcome each one of you for joining us today. I'm super excited about today's discussion. Getting students to think about their performance and getting them to think about their learning itself has significant differences. So the question remains, can too much of emphasis on performance reduce students' interest in learning? With that thought, let's begin. This panel discussion, Performance versus Learning, Is It Costing Too Much?, is organized by Adhyapan. Adhyapan is an educator-only platform where teachers, professors, lecturers, tutors, which means any educator, can look for resources, share resources such as lesson plan, classroom activities, find a mentor or guide, ask questions, find answer, and so many other things. So do check it out. For today's panel discussion, we have panelists from different walks of life. And let me introduce you all to our esteemed panelists. So today we have Abha Adams, and I don't think she needs any introduction, but to fulfill my duty here, I know she is an innovative educationist and a prolific writer on education. She has spent 35 years in education, BBC Media, arts management, both in India and the UK. She taught at her alma mater, Lady Shri Ram College, and completed a second master's in theatre arts at the University of Leeds, UK. As former director of the Shri Ram Schools and advisor education to Step by Step School Noida, she has been instrumental in founding and developing 2 major educational institutions in the country. Presently, she is a leading educational consultant and vice chair of the Ahvan Trust, working with state governments on policy and strategy to upgrade government schools and teachers' skill and proficiencies. Thank you, Abha, for joining us today. Next, we have Usha Manjunath. Usha Manjunath, with 16 years of teaching and administrative experience, is working as a school principal in Bangalore. She believes in and advocates creative teaching ways and a curriculum that helps students to not only have the conceptual understanding, but learn critical life skills too. Thank you for joining us today, ma'am. Then we have Riddhi Agarwal. Riddhi is the co-founder of Swatantra Taaleem, a non-profit that nurtures scientific temper among children in an effort to develop their own villages. Riddhi leads strategy, content, and research and development in the organization. She is a postgraduate in education from TIS, Mumbai, and undergraduate from LSR. She is an avid storyteller, puppeteer, and origami lover. Prior to Swatantra Taaleem, she worked as a teacher and a special educator at Sahyadri School, Pune. She also worked at Nalanda an Lucknow-based NGO, as a material developer and trainer. She has more than 7 years of experience in corporate NGO and education sector, having worked with leading organizations like TOI and Edelweiss. Recently, she has been awarded with FabLearn Fellowship from Columbia University, New York. Thank you for joining us today, Nriti. Next, we have Srivatsan Ramaswamy. Srivatsan leads the Foundational Literacy and Numeracy Mission project at Madhi Foundation and oversees all project implementation activities as part of Madhi's partnership with the School Education Department of Tamil Nadu, an alumnus of SRM University and London School of Economics and Political Science. Srivatsan has worked in the education sector for over 6 years, including 2 years as a government school teacher during the fellowship with TFI. He has worked in the curriculum and syllabus drafting committees in Tamil Nadu and has co-authored nearly 40 books for children and teachers in Tamil Nadu. And last but not the least, for today's panel discussion, our moderator and facilitator, Anustup Nayak. Anustup serves as a director at Central Square Foundation, leading the classroom instruction and practice team. He brings close to 2 decades of on-ground experience in education reform. As a member of the founding team at Exceed Education, an innovative teaching learning program impacting learning in 3,000 schools, he has played roles spanning advocacy, teacher training, leadership development, assessment, and EdTech. His work has been published in the Harvard Business Review Online, Forbes magazine, and the MIT Journal of Innovations. Anustup holds an education master's from the Harvard Graduate School of Education and an MS from the Georgia Tech School of Public Policy. I welcome you all once again, and now I hand it over to Anustup to set the context of the discussion.
Thank you, Abhijit, for that very, very touching introduction. And I also wanted to introduce you to the audience, and you spoke a little bit about yourself. Abhijit is an exceptional young person I happened to meet during my work at Exceed, and I've worked very closely with him in the field. And he loves to teach, he loves to coach teachers, and we're very excited that you put this platform together. And so thanks to you for having all of us here. So without much ado, I'll get started, and I'll take the liberty of picking on someone who I have known the longest in this group, Abha. Abha, you've got a very interesting position now that you sit on the board of Adhyapan, which works with children in government and underprivileged schools. You've also been part of the schools, some of the most progressive, elite, and high-performing schools in the country. From that standpoint, and I wanted to pick on something you said many years back, and I still have that newspaper clipping with me. You called Indian education a Mad Hatter's party. But you've also not only been a critique of the system, but you've also built many good workplaces, many good schools yourself. And as you look at performance and learning, right, do you see these as a dichotomy? Do you see that we can have one without the other? What's been your experience? And tell us a little bit from your experience of working with children, over several decades.
Okay, I had a feeling that you were going to pick on me, Anustup, but I wasn't prepared for which googly you would spring. I do see them as separate. And if I can just bring in a personal perspective here, that I went to school 50 years ago, and as was expected at that time, it was performance-driven, traditional, conservative, and so when I thought back, what did I learn from school? I learned how to be a good examinee. And, and I was, and many others didn't have that, sadly, that advantage. But that was all that I learned in the classroom. It was only years later when I went to do another master's at the University of Leeds, and I thought, having taught at university for 6 years, I'm going to ace my first assignment. And, pride goeth before a fall is so true. My tutor ever so gently told me, it's all very well, Abha, you have told me everything you know, but I don't understand what you think. What is your thought? So I realized at that point that my education so far had not taught me how to think. And that was my first introduction to thinking is the most critical part of learning. Thinking about a particular idea or concept and exploring all the ramifications. I got a closer sense of understanding when I watched my son grow, and he was in the UK. We were there together. My husband was also a teacher, and he felt teaching was a subversive activity where you have to question everything. And I learned a great deal from him as well. And then coming back, I was able to apply all this and see that between learning, which is so amazing, I used to tell staff that, learning is like magic. You're actually unpeeling a layer of an onion, and that experience is so wonderful. And if you learn through experiences, you change. Whenever we learn something new, we change. We don't remain the same. So for me, learning that changes you is the most critical piece. I don't subscribe to the performance piece according to marks, but I do weigh in on assessment for learning. I think assessment is critical. You cannot have a classroom with the right pedagogy, the right approaches, the right reflection, where children are taught these reflective practices as our teachers, and not have an assessment tool for learning, which helps the teacher understand how she has been able to, let's say, create this area for the environment for children to learn and track each child's progression. Because as educators, we all know learning is progression. It is also a spiral. And yes, there are times in one's life when you are graded according to your marks, and that's important. But I have seen my best students, the best learners, the best minds do the worst in examinations. And vice versa, sadly. So that's where I stand. And therefore, the focus in the schools that I was associated with was always, always on creating an environment where learning is continuous for the student, for the teacher. And that means changing cultures. And that's not easy, but I know that's not your question, so I won't say anything.
No, I think that was a perfect entry into this conversation. And when you mentioned a couple of things, and I'm going to come back to you on one of them, certainly around how do you create a culture of thinking among teachers, and I'll come back to you on that. And since you mentioned assessment, I'm warning Srivatsan that I will get him on a reflection and assessment in a few minutes. But before that, I want to come to Usha ji. Usha, you are involved in running and building classrooms which are about the kind of things that Abha spoke about, that it is about thinking, it is about making children curious. So give us an example of your school, of the classrooms. What do you see? If I was a Martian and I came to your school, what will I use in the classroom?
Since I work in an academic oriented school so far, though I come from a creative teaching background, so let me speak with that background of academic oriented schools here. As I do agree what Abha madam said, but when it comes to a school, we need to have both, okay? Because we work on time frame, we work on examination patterns. So sometimes more of a thinking that we concentrate on, and we need to answer to our parents as such. So parents will come back and ask us, where is the performance of my child? So the child is with you for so many years or so many months or whatever. It is always a conflict for us who work in a kind of a school, academic oriented schools that we are in. It is like balancing both. So what we could do as schools is we try to manage both. I think most of you may not agree, because one's goes up and others goes down. If you concentrate on thinking and performance goes down, and concentrate on performance, obviously their thinking skill is limited too. So what we could do in a regular classroom is something that we teach in our four walls, inside the four walls. They should be able to connect outside, may not be 100%, at least. So whatever that we teach within the classroom, it's more of they have learning outside environment too. So we are trying to bring in that connection. Say if they're learning about a plant, so instead of showing a audio visual and then draw a picture on the board, instead take the students there. At least we are privileged to have some kind of a plans around. So show it and experience it and do it, so that it's a learning for them. So in case if they travel outside, if they see something, and they should be able to connect it just like this. So whereas if it is classroom, okay, it is meant only I need to learn this lesson for this test and exam and I'm done with. I did have my own students, when we assess for 20-25 marks monthly test, they'll sit a day before the exam. They train themselves probably 2 to 3 o'clock in the late night or early in the morning or whatever. Next day, 20 on 20, 25 on 25 on paper. After 3 months, the same question comes, the child has no answer. So this is how it is. But what I strongly believe is probably a formal schools like us, we need to manage both. I mean, most of you may not agree, as I said, performance, again, it is a short-term goal. But so when we work within the framework, we need to balance both. Wherever there is a possibility to connect, wherever we just trickle their mind to think, probably schools can concentrate on those points for them to think and create something. So what happens when we see a particular new product in the market? We try to have it. I mean, even our students for that matter. You see, a new pen comes in the market, all 20 in my class will have a new pen. But we don't teach them to think, why don't I create something like this instead of making the use of whatever is existed in the market? So that part, somewhere we need to do it. So what I suggest is, from my experience, whatever is possible and likely, where we can tickle their mind and connect it with the available environment, probably we have to do both. So that's what I say, but more of thinking, less of performance, because learning is continuous. I mean, learning leads to a life as such. They don't, say for example, if they have to go and do a work, the process is really important for them than the product. What I see in a classroom scenario, the moment you say we are going to draw something, my students don't listen to the instructions immediately. They take out their pen, paper and all that. What next? By then I would have passed 2 instructions and they have lost. So the process is important, which we need to put in the learning process. So that is what I would like to say. For me, both are important, but the graph is little variated.
No, thank you. I think thanks for making that point. That and I think a lot of us would agree that we need a fine balance. And I'll come back to you on the point you made around parents, which is, I think, a very, very important point, that we cannot, as school leaders, do anything in isolation. Before I move to Riddhi, I'd love to tell the audience that we would love to hear your questions. So please put in questions in the chat box, and we will address or try to address as many of them as possible. We'll keep some time aside for that. So do keep your thinking hats on. So your questions and comments, and if you could also mention the name of the panelist, if you feel, who you think could address your question, that would be great. So Riddhi, I want to come into a conversation with you. You are doing something fascinating. You're trying to bring STEM education, but not in a traditional classroom context, that you're trying to bring it in from the outside. And when you go to schools, you work with schools, or you work with children outside of schools, how do you see this battle between performance and learning play out when children are engaged in the experiences that you're bringing to them? And how are you able to negotiate that through the program that you're creating? How are you getting these children to learn things which they would not have learned through the traditional textbooks or in the classroom environment? So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I mean, hearing Usha ji that about her work in a typical classroom or a school environment. I think in that sense, we have a lot of liberty in some sense because we design our own programs. But yeah, then to take those programs to work in the community, it is really, I would say, easy from our perspective. But yeah, to operationalize in the community, it is obviously there are challenges, but otherwise it is easy from us to plan and go and take it to the community. But when we take the same program to schools, to convince the teachers or the administration staff, it gets a little tough because they say that how will we get marks from this? The only question which we always have to hear anywhere and everywhere. But I think there is, because nowadays this particular debate is there all around. So I think everybody wants something to come inside their school, but they don't want to do it themselves. I think that is also one thing which is which we have been experiencing quite a lot, because the teachers want to focus themselves on the performance side, and they want somebody else to come in and do that learning or little bit of innovation kind of a thing, and then go, that person can go back, because that's not needed throughout the year or for any assessment purposes. So I think I would agree to Abaji on that point, that assessment actually needs to change. That's the only way possible learning can be given more focus to rather than performance. So, but I would say that as we work in the community, the only why we have to focus more on learning rather than performance is also a factor, because over there we have to prove the relevance of education to the community. So for that, for them, it doesn't matter if their child gets a 10 on a 10 or a 9 on a 10. It's more important that what has he or she learned in that process. So then for us, the whole focus turns towards the process. And because we work on, we can say it STEM or any kind of innovation, which we work towards, the whole idea is around what the community's needs are there at that point of time. And we try to connect what is there in their daily lives and bring it to the classroom or the environment where we are teaching or doing any project-based learning with them, with the children. So that is how the parents also get connected to whatever we are doing. So like, for example, I mean, there's one example which like, I think it's like my favorite is we were talking to students about alternative sources of energy at a point of time. And they all were like, okay, really these things work? Because in their village at that point of time, there was not even an electricity pole. So they were like, I mean, is it really, are you making sense what you're talking about? So we said, yeah, does make sense. In a lot of places, solar energy, wind energy, things are working around. So then there was instantly one child said that if it is so powerful, can it charge our mobile phones? Because our mothers have to walk some 10 kilometers to charge a phone because their fathers are working in the city. So we said, yes, it can definitely, but how will it happen? So then from that point on, we thought that, okay, this is the starting point from where we have to start. So we got a lot of reading material from them. We got some videos for them to see. And then they came up with the solution of making a solar mobile charger. So, and these were like around grade 5 girls who were struggling with that, and then they had not seen wires or solar panels or anything before that, so they struggled to put some wire somewhere, and suddenly it was up and running. The phone was getting charged. So they were like so excited that it's actually charging, and the whole community also started from that point on. Suddenly we saw a spurge in the children coming and enrolling into our learning center. So we were like, okay, so this is where we have to built on. We have to build a connect to what is there in their surroundings and then bring it to the classroom. Then only they will also feel the relevance of that education. So I think in that sense, performance is not really an important criteria for us. But yes, how we go to performance is we change the assessments. Like we try to innovate in the assessment patterns.
Great. No, thank you so much. That was such a beautiful example. I'll never forget it. And especially the point you made that when you make learning relevant to the life of a child, it sticks. And then performance doesn't really become that big of an issue, because human beings have innate biological desire for learning, which we can tap on. And unfortunately, we rob that from young children. Srivatsan, you and those of us who work in FLN and now Abha does, we stand accused of foundational learning and foundational literacy and numeracy. Of course, it's a very big problem in India. Large numbers of children are exiting school without the base level reading and numeracy skills. But I think one critique which I've heard a lot about foundational literacy and numeracy, and especially how it's articulated in media and other places, is that it is too much performance oriented, too much focused on performance, on floor level skills. Do you agree with that? That's my first question. And if you can address the second question on assessment, that I think one of the interesting things that you and your colleagues at Madhi Foundation, and I'm very privileged to work with all of you, do is to actually use assessment to inform instruction. And that's something that Abha mentioned, that's something that Ushaji mentioned. So would love to hear your thoughts on how, and in your experience, that how can we make foundational literacy and numeracy a lot more about learning and, of course, have an element of performance. And the second is, how do we use assessment to inform instruction and learning?
Thank you, Anustup. And so before I get to the accusation bits, I'll probably take the second question first, which is, I think as I was listening to Abha ma'am and Usha ma'am as well, I don't think I associate performance and learning as polar opposites. But as I was reflecting during the session as well, I think it's because I don't subscribe to the notion of performance being marks oriented. Maybe the way I define performance at an individual level as a person itself is not that. And I think which is why I sort of feel that if, as Riddhi ma'am was also saying, that definitely the way assessments are used need to change, right? And the way I would almost look at it is that your learning is your goal, and all of us know for sure that children come to school or anywhere else to learn. I mean, and as adults also, we would love to keep learning all our life. All of us are lifelong learners in many ways, and the point is that it is a goal. But how do I know if I'm really reaching there, if I'm really learning, right? I mean, it's a big, complex notion, and it can have varied meanings, and that's okay. I mean, the varied meanings allows for context to rule learning, which is the good part about it. Which is why I feel that when it comes to performance, it needs to be about measuring, yes, but it is measuring as a feedback for the instructor, right? I mean, the performance is for the instructor to understand how much the child has learned. And hence the feedback that actually children get performance, but should be on their learning. I think that is sort of where it gets a little confusing, because teachers are asked to improve performance, and that feedback is in many ways without any transmission loss directly hits the children, right? I mean, you need to improve your performance. But if we could just divide the two into two parts, where I look at measurement of performance, but that is as feedback for improving my teaching learning practices, and give feedback to children on learning, I'm pretty sure there is a space where both can coexist and actually feed into each other to improve the classroom practices, which is sort of where I would come to the notion of FLN being very performance oriented. I think what we try to do with the FLN mission as well is to tip the scales of assessment away from performance and root them into learning. So while we talk about goals and targets, I think our endeavor continues to remain to keep it rooted in learning as opposed to performance. And I think as long as Riddhi ma'am said, if you're able to change the way assessment is looked at, consumed and used and practiced, there is definitely a way to, I would say, shift the paradigm of how performance is defined and move away from maybe how we define it today.
No, thanks for making that very strong case, and for making the point that oftentimes we make the mistake of associating performance with marks, and that to marks on tests that test for rote memorization or of things other than persistent learning. So this need to align assessment, and there's a whole bunch of questions, Shivatsan, if you see on the chat box, have come out on assessment. I think our audience is very curious about assessment. We'll come back to assessment because this assessment is like a lightning rod. It tends to, bring a lot of different debates. But I'll go to Abha around this work that we need to do with the teaching community. Abha, one of your contributions and legacies, as if I may argue, is to have created a whole generation of educators who think very differently. And I would love to hear your thoughts on what have you been able to do to get teachers to think differently about this, because teachers are also a very important stakeholder. I think the most important stakeholder in this process, including them in this journey is really, really important. But like all of us, we are a product of the system that we were taught in. How do we undo some of the effects of that? How do we get teachers to appreciate some of this is something that I wanted to hear a little bit from you.
I'll try and gather my thoughts, Anastu. I don't remember doing anything according to a particular plan. I think it was more intuitive, and it does change. Whatever your strategy, it changes from context to context. So I found that first selection in the recruitment process, I looked for individuals who felt the same way, who felt they wanted to question the status quo, who were questioning in themselves, who were seeking, who were inquiring, who were curious, who were slightly, not off the charts, but who were slightly not your middle of the road, B.Ed, M.Ed, etc., etc. And we, as an institution, my first institution, we took that leap of faith with young women, primarily in the urban areas, and men who came from diverse backgrounds like advertising. I mean, a bit like what TFI does. Okay. And so having looked for the right people, and I think once you set out the philosophy, the aspiration that you have as an institution, and the kind of learning you would like to create, the learning environment and the learning experiences, you tend to attract like-minded people. Like always attracts like. And then having selected them, we did a very, very systematic immersion where we all, now I learned collaboration out of my classroom. In our classroom, everybody is an individual solo. But doing the theater that I did in school or in college and working the kind of institutions that I have, everything that I learned about collaboration, I learned outside of it. But we created ourselves as a group of learners. We looked at what we would read. Ken Robinson was a hot favorite, and we studied it. We tried to envision what we wanted, and then we tried to work out how do we get there. So we gave ourselves time in developing a vision, in developing a philosophy of teaching or a pedagogy, looking at what other systems across the world were doing. And many of the young people who came had had some experiences, but neither Cambridge nor IB was established at that time in the country. And so we didn't have those schools to go to, but we read widely. And we embedded a professional development hub. I won't call it center, but a kind of a, like a little magnet, where we met weekly as study groups. We charted our progress, and we got resource people to train us. And then we started, and we course corrected. We ensured the environment was open, that we would challenge each other, and we would question. And if it wasn't working, we'd say why, and we would change. And so it was a long process. It was work in progress, and it continued to be work in progress. But side by side, what we had to do was that we had to work with the parent community. I remember a parent sitting across me saying in a very, very grim way, you're using our children as guinea pigs. How do we know that they're going to pass their board exam? And I gently said, Mr. So-and-so, I don't remember calling him sir, with all due respect, little boy is in class 1. I think we have 11 years to go, and there is a lot of time for him to ace the board examination. In the meanwhile, he is learning. And the other thing that we did, Anastu, was that we looked at different ways of showcasing a child's work. See, so far we had only got the exercise book going home. And if the book is not, filled in with illegible scrawls, parents think, "Padhai nahi ho rahi." So we brought parents into school. There was a back to school. Come and see how they're learning. Come and sit in the classroom for a day. Attend every single class that you like. And then see the joy that is happening in the classroom. Because we were clear that learning had to be joyful. And this was in the 90s, 92. And so exhibitions, assemblies on every week that parents could come to, children presenting their work, children doing work, children sharing, collaborating, and all of that in the portfolio that went home. Report card, but there was a portfolio as well. And children took back all their, handy, and their work was, it was a rich display of children's creativity. In the classroom, in the corridors, the walls spoke, the corridors spoke, and the children's voices spoke. I think that's how we did it. And we used to have 2 meetings a year, which we used to call realignment, so that we didn't lose focus of where we had started, where we were trying to go, what was our vision, what went well, what didn't go well. And at the end of the year, we always had a "why do I teach" session for the teachers. And so we would spend a couple of hours just writing and sticking it up on the wall. And then we would spend a few hours reading each other's and then speaking. So that kind of, culture takes time to incubate, but if it's in, it doesn't die, not easily.
And I can vouch for it after working with many of your colleagues, that once you spark that kind of openness and inquiry in a teacher, it just lives on. And with that, we have lots of very interesting questions from the audience. So with your permission, if I can move to the audience questions, and I'll start by putting Abha again on this spot, because this is a question on reflecting on something that you said. Someone's asking, what is the value of assessment? If Abha is saying that her smartest students are doing badly in assessment, is it a problem with the accuracy of assessment, or are we not testing what matters?
There is value in assessment. I have found that it's examinations that get it wrong, because it's the exam that prescribes a certain way of delivery. And everybody does not have that. As I said right at the very beginning, I just was, I think, sort of naturally gifted at being able to deconstruct examinations. My younger sister couldn't, and she was much brighter than I was, far more creative. And so I think it's changing the assessment so that it allows, and I'm not calling it an examination, you can, okay, changing the summative so that it allows, don't create test situations. I wanted to say this earlier as well. There is assessment and there is testing. When you have a test situation, the child, goes into a kind of mode of I'm being tested. Whereas You can do an assessment without the child knowing that you're actually assessing his or her proficiency in something. Now, I know that there are those who will argue, but this is a big bad world. Why are you shirking this? They need to have that stress. And some pressure is very important. And children need to go through that rigor. I absolutely agree. But for little children, this constant testing situation, in my opinion, doesn't work. Doesn't help the learning process. Right. So I think, Anustup, I'll be very honest, I've forgotten the question. I've got so carried away.
Yeah, the question was really, how do you improve assess? And there are a bunch of questions around that, Srivatsan and others. You can have a look at that, and I'll come back to it. But you've answered the core of the question there. And but I'll move to Riddhi, and there's a very interesting question that very often schools are holding children accountable to reading and writing rather than speaking and listening. That's one thing. And especially the second part of the question is equally interesting, that in the 20th century, 21st century, careers, aren't they equally important? So since you're kind of looking at education in a very holistic manner, and especially working with different kinds of communities, where does this, and you mentioned this whole point of career and life connect, just tell us a little more about what's relevant to succeeding in the work life, so to say, for children. And you've also come out of professional life and chosen education.
So I would say, I will give you an example of a few of our students. Like now they are coming out, some of them have done their grade 12 exams and they are going into professional careers, and they are going into varied careers. Like we have two of our girls from the same community where we work. They are enrolled into a nursing college. One of the girls is enrolled into, she's going into a different path. She's going into a chicken curry entrepreneurial course. She's enrolled in that. So this is what I would say, that because these girls had the experience of everything, as we said, it's not the reading and writing focused. Like I would say, we had to teach. There was because if they want to go into stereotypical careers, they have to get a degree. So that is important also at one point of time. But then the only importance which we gave was that there should be a love for learning. If there is a love for learning and they know what they want to do, or they want to at least try out it, they will go and perform also. But if they don't know why they are learning something, they're just going there as a flock of sheep. Okay, I want to go there because everybody is going. Then they will not succeed in that performance scale or assessment scale also. So I think that was important for us. In history classes or history, if you wanted to touch upon history, what we did was we actually did nukkad nataks in the community, or we did a lot of puppet shows in the community. So we were actually informing a lot of critical pedagogy at that point of time, and spreading awareness in the community around many important issues. But at the same time, the children were learning because they were themselves studying, researching on the things and preparing the performances. So they were doing their own lessons also, but willfully, not really that, okay, it's a forced manner, I have to do this for this particular assessment or this particular testing situation, as was mentioned. So I would say reading, writing is important, but if it is for the love for learning, then it is important. And speaking, listening, everything is important. Then only you will become a person who would go and present yourself anywhere, or talk to anybody. So the ultimate aim of education is also that we can question things, we can talk to anybody else. Like we all sitting over here are talking to each other and listening and interpreting what we, comprehending what everybody else is saying. That is also one of the important aims, which sometimes we feel that the testing situations actually ruin for the children.
No, thank you for saying that. And if I may abuse my privilege as a moderator to add to this, I wish schools actually spent more time on reading and writing and speaking and listening. I don't think they do, actually, because reading, like you said, for pleasure, for comprehension, for generating more knowledge, I don't think that's necessarily the purpose of reading as it is practiced in schools. I don't think there's enough opportunities for creative writing, for argumentative writing, for persuasive writing. And those are the kinds of 21st. I would go so far as to say that reading, writing are 21st and speaking and listening are 21st century skills, and they aren't emphasized in the right way. I think there is some of it that happens. But there's an interesting question I want to bring Usha ji in, and since Usha, you spoke about, within the context of a traditional school, and we do know that there are certain constraints within which we work, and let's stay within those constraints that you were talking about, examination, performance, and there's a question around growth versus proficiency, and of course there's a whole lot of literature around growth mindset and all of that. But if I were to bring it to brass tacks, imagine that that a parent is concerned that, is my child growing? Is that even a concern? That is my child improving versus is my child proficient at a certain skill or proficient in a particular subject? How do you see that playing out? Where do you stand on this debate? Is there even an either or, growth versus proficiency?
Yeah, thank you. I agree what Abha Madam said when the parent starts asking for it. See, we also tried, introducing kind of an thinking, and I just have to take an example where we did it with the lower grades. We wanted to do something on nature. So we brought in a science teacher there, and then social teacher there, as well as English teacher. So there is something to do with literature, something to do with science, and something to do with social. So like this, we tried with few concepts, and we knew that students learned so well. Any question related to that, they should be able to answer in a formal, assessment pattern. So when during the exam, till then parents didn't have any issues. During the exam, parent had a concern, how should I make my child to learn? Because you have messed up everything, and I want my child to learn English, this is the portion, and social is this, and science is this, and how is it? So this we tried and tested with the lower grades, but convincing parents is really difficult. They keep quiet to an extent when it comes to an assessment on the report card, and when they see the grades on that, and they start questioning us, and they start comparing their neighboring school children who age the same age group, and they are doing this, and why are you not doing this, and all that. So this is where we get stuck, because we have to work within the frame. So finally, what we did, what we understood down the line by this practice is, we need to maintain that transparency with the students, teachers, and the parents. So what happens sometimes, there's a communication drop between these three people, and it again causes a kind of an learning hindrance for a child. So finally, we decided, okay, we need to bring in parents to the school, as Abha Madam said. So they need to know what my child is doing, and they need to know what they are good at, and how well they can study, or if not academics, what are the other areas that they can do well. So finally, they need to know the interesting corners and the effective corners of the child, of their child to support. So that is it. But anything that we did, we couldn't do it from 8th upwards. Whatever we did it, because parents truly doesn't accept it, because once the child comes to a higher grades, they look at the boards and they want everything to be systematic, and this is how it should be and all that. Whatever we tried only up to grade 7. Those parents who are happy with this kind of performance, again, they'll come back and ask, are you continuing to do the same thing for grade 8 onwards as well? Because we are concerned with board pattern. They need to write for these many marks, and that kind of a concising thing they need to know. You need to put them into a proper assessment pattern of board, all sort of request. So finally, what we did was, what are we doing is, like, we bring in parents to the school to know what the child is. But of course, they are happy with, but the transition period that they undergo, there's a lot of pressure with the parents, which they start putting on the children. So the other child and so school is doing like this, and your performance is, we always try and convince that your child knows more than what the other children of same age group is, they have the knowledge, and this is the skill that they are learning. But still, parents, when it comes to an promotional exams, whatever we say, we had only a little percent of parents who agreed with us. Those who enjoyed also, when they come to a higher grades, they don't accept it. So whatever we do it with the lower grades.
No, that's useful, and thank you for being candid. And it's okay. I think wherever we find as educators a place of opportunity, we should exploit that opportunity to the best of our abilities. And then there are obviously barriers. Shri, I want to come to you with a very interesting question on remedial instruction. One of our audience members is asking, I'm working on resources for remedial instruction for children who need additional support. I'm confused now if the premise itself is wrong. That's this word remedial. And the reason I'm putting this question to you is you're also working in very under-resourced settings where children may be, fallen quite behind for various reasons. And you've, written about it very eloquently in some of your blogs related to the ambitious nature of the textbook or the failure of the instruction. So tell us a little bit around two things. One is the question that our audience member has asked, but also some of the strategies that you are adopting to help children who have fallen behind to catch up, which I know a little bit about what you do. So love to hear both sides of that story.
So I think first thing is that it's an excellent question. And as teachers and as practitioners, I think the only real weapon we have is that we have to be reflective practitioners. I think the choices that the teachers have to make every day in the classroom is complex, right? Am I really working on some long-term development gains? Am I really focusing on learning, or is this really very close to memorization, or is it becoming too mundane for the kids, right? I mean, and at the end of the day, we need a balance. I mean, there is a lot of philosophy, there's a lot of theory, but as practitioners, you need to bring all of that into the classroom in some form or the other, and each have their own merits and demerits. So the only thing I can say to the person asking the question is that persist with these questions, and you will find your answer as you go into the classroom. But at a very fundamental level, I think that providing targeted support and instruction for children who are unable to participate effectively inside the classroom is a needed intervention. It is a needed area of intervention, even though it may seem like it is performance oriented. But what you're really building up is sort of building up the stack of, I would say, prerequisite skills that children need to really start exploring. Now, there are some elements of learning that can happen devoid of prerequisite skills, even application, right? Like for example, the wonderful example that Riddhi ma'am shared, that there was a problem, the problem statement is open, it is realized by the children, and then we expose them through different media, and then they try and pick it up. But the premise there is that I'm listening something and I can understand what I'm listening. Now, if as a child, I cannot comprehend what I'm listening, even if it is an audio, if a person is speaking, etc., and I don't know what to do with the information that is presented to me, it is going to be a very, very chaotic world to them, right? Like a very simple exercise that we do with the teachers, like when we do training for them, so that we make the teachers understand how difficult second language is for students. We just draw some random patterns on the board, and then we say, read it, right? And then we say, this is something like A, we say this is B, this is C, we will like read it now. And you will see that the teachers will struggle because they don't know how the phonetics of the scriptures in front of them work, right? And then immediately, once that is sort of broken down, then they see immediate success. They're able to read. Now, for aspects such as this, where children need support to process the information that is presented to them, I think it is important to keep your learning goals appropriately, right? I mean, at the end of the day, learning is also defined by the instructor inside the classroom, and learning is not, it's a continuum. I cannot say that I reach milestone A, learning is done. So there's an entire world beyond that. And like anything else in the development sector, it is always and will be a continuum. So the only thing is go for it, continue to question yourself, and I'm sure you'll have the answer when you see the child in front of you.
No, thanks for that very thoughtful answer. We have a few minutes left, so I'll do a little bit of a quick fire set of questions. Aman, there's an interesting question which is there, which is, and then I'm adding a little bit of my own masala to it, that we, all of us, and including myself, we criticize assessments and the assessment system that is prevalent in our country, which you very nicely put it, that how it inhibits the growth of children. But I do know that in schools like the ones that you have helped set up, they have created their own internal systems of assessment, which are more thoughtful. And you opened with that statement that assessments are important, but we need good assessment. So how do we train teachers around assessments that are less about rote and more about authentic learning? How do we create that assessment environment which is less stressful? And there's another question related to that. So would like to hear what you've done, and then and move on to the last question.
This has been perhaps the most difficult piece, as pedagogy is far more straightforward. But getting teachers to understand what creative assessments can do, what are the different ways of doing it. There was a lot of training that we sought, and we sought it from overseas specialists who came and trained en masse. And on the face of it, Anushtha, it just looked, why didn't we think of this before? It's really quite simple. There were dipsticks, there was just thumbs up or thumbs down, or if you're unsure, then you make a signal for unsure, so that the teacher knows there's an immediate assessment. So you know exactly, are there children who are losing it in class? And if they are, I'm going to take 2 steps and then proceed again. If I find that there's still a stumbling block, then I'm going to make sure that, okay, we'll come back to this and I'll take that group separately. This just to also link up to what Srivatsan said about the remediation. Remediation is critical. We just use the word remediation, but it's support. That's what he said. You have to support the learning of the child. Every child has, and we also have to set the limits high, Anustup. We have to have high expectations. Each child has a different sort of, threshold, but they must have the desire and the encouragement to say, I'm really going to go for this. I'm going to do better than this, which is not about the mark. But look, this assessment shows that your first paragraph is extremely good, but you failed to develop the body. So go ahead and redraft. That's another thing that we learned. Redrafts are something that we don't give allowance for, okay? But you learn from your mistakes and those get better and better. So it was intensive training, and application was hard because it was easy to slip back into the usual pattern of what we always did. And for the national boards that I was a part of, at the end of the day, there was that last step and that class 12 framework. And Usha, I absolutely understand that we did, we played the field for as long as possible. And then we said, okay, everybody, 11 months to go. You have your CBSE. Here's the system and how to crack it. Okay. And so, we were being practical as well, whether it was the ISC, whether it was CBSE. But when it came to the international boards, the children there were lucky because the assessment patterns there were so much more creative, so much more fun. They trusted the teachers with internal assessments in a way that we have not been able to trust our teachers. So I'd say that much.
Well, thanks for that. And last question to Riddhi before we wrap up. We just have a minute before we can close this session. You work with children in a situation where often they are not always guided by a teacher or a formal instructor. And one of the questions we received says, do we need to make students more responsible for their own learning as well? Are we doing enough in that space? What are your thoughts? What have you done or your group has done to make students more responsible for their own learning?
So I would say, yeah, the students need to be put in control of their learning, I would say, effectively. So we actually use a lot of visible thinking routines. These are the routines which have been designed by Project Zero, Harvard University. And so we have converted them into obviously our language so that it's conversant with the children and all. And so I think that has helped us a lot in um, giving us the confidence that yes, how the children are seeing themselves, how they're performing actually. So because that is what our goal is, we want that the love of learning should be there, so they should define their own path, so that self reflection should come in the children. But how will the self reflection come? So as has been said, that culture needs to be there, that environment needs to be set, the children needs to be given those tools so that they know how to define their learning, or how to track their learning, or how to think about their own learning. Because if they don't have the tools, they will never be able to do that. So I think, yeah, we have been doing that a lot. And also we have tried to interact with the parents also, because in some way, one of the factors the child trusts herself or himself is that the parent is trusting them. And the parent needs to trust their learning, that okay, fine, whatever you're doing good, and you will do good. If that happens, I think, and that I think is across wherever you work, because I've been hearing Usha ji, Abha ma'am, and everybody saying the same thing, that unless and until there is that parent connect, that community connect, whether it is a formal school, whether it is a community learning center, anywhere, I think if the parents trust the child and the child trusts the parent and the teacher is involved in that process, I think the learning will automatically given importance to.
Thank you so much. I unfortunately have to bring this lovely conversation to an end. I learned a lot, and here's what I learned. The first thing I learned was that it's really not an either or between performance and learning. Both are important. I think both have their place. What I also learned is that really a culture of learning is about a culture of thinking, exploration, and inquiry in the classroom. And that's very, very important. What I also learned is that assessment plays a very fundamental role in shaping the kind of culture of thinking and learning in the classroom. And an important element of assessment that both Abha and Shri reminded us is that it is about informing the teaching. In fact, it is less about judging the child, but more about helping the teacher help the child better. And finally, as Ushaji and Riddhi have reminded us, the relationship between the parent, a trusting relationship between the parent, teacher, and the school are very, very critical to maintaining this fine balance between performance and learning. With that, thank you all, Abha, Usha, Riddhi, and Shivatsan, and thank you, Abhijit, for hosting us. Over to Abhijit to conclude.
Thank you so much, Anustub, for moderating this, and thank you all the panelists for being here, giving your time, valuable time for this. And this was a lovely discussion. I'm sure our participants must have learned and taken up, and very well concluded by Anustub. I just want to thank you all for being here today.
Thanks. Thank you, Anustub.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.